everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You are exceptionally welcome to our YouTube channel and our continuing conversation today. We are doctors. We have social science degrees that basically make us experts in studying and learning about peoples and cultures. So what do we do with that? We have lots of conversations. We have them all around topics like phrases and words we don't say anymore. Boy, is that a long list. To race and representation in The Handmaid's Tale. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. And, all the fantastic conversations we could have about the themes of Disney Plus's The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We run the gamut with these conversations. We would have them otherwise, and we often do in varying talking apps and ways of communication. But we turn on the recording devices so that we can have these conversations with others. So please make sure you do the YouTube things and like and subscribe. Click the bell so you get notifications, especially if you want to know when it is the next time we're talking about something super, super not depressing like today's video, lol JK.
So today's video, speaking of, is part of our series on the Colonizers World Tour, where we're spending time in countries around the world and talking about the legacy of colonization there, how it affected the history, the resources, the what have you. And this week we are in the French colony of the former French colony of Haiti. Mm-hmm. Now, if you joined us yesterday for our Haiti 101 video, you will know that we are not even scratching the surface of everything there is to do with Haiti. I think yesterday was probably our longest 101 video ever, but still didn't even begin to touch what was going on. So we will be spending next year looking provincially at the month of August. Next year's the whole month talking about Haiti. So just know that. A couple things up ahead of time. I'm in charge of finding all the art, by the way. So if you hate the art we find, yell at me. I find the art. And Haiti art made by Haitians or about Haiti is rough because there are no distributors of Haiti films. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the documentaries from first blush seemed very white savior-y. It seemed a lot of like white people trying to fix Haiti. And we are big believers that the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And we like empowering those things. And we were looking at the documentary about Dr. Paul Farmer and about the founding of Partners in Health, which is a lot about empowering Haitian doctors to go to medical school and be able to do those things. But then we saw this one called Lakay. And as I'm looking around on the internet, there's not a single negative review of it. Nobody is bringing up that it's patronizing, which some of the other ones I found, like that was in it. And I was like, okay, it's about two Haitian brothers who grew up in the United States going back to find their long lost sibling after the earthquake. And I was like, okay, let's give this a run. Maybe we'll avoid white saviorism because it is about two Haitian individuals. Well, then I started watching it this morning as we were recording this, and then my COO life kind of took over and I had to hit pause and I let Dr. Erin know, like, hey, by the way, I just haven't gotten to Lakay yet. She's like, don't worry, I'm watching it, blah, blah, blah. And as I come back to our entire Slack chat full of terrible things that are happening, and essentially too long didn't read, you don't need to be white to act like a white savior. And what we mean by that, let me unpack that really briefly before I turn this over to Dr. Erin for her very well-earned rants about this film. When we say white saviorism, essentially what that means is not believing that the people closest to the solution, closest to the problems, are closest to the solution. It's believing it's a behavior, it's a set of behaviors. There's a great Instagram account called No White Saviors that is run out of Kampala, Uganda, that talks about Africans can solve African problems. And really often what people in under-resourced areas need is resources. They don't need solutions. They have the solutions. They just don't have the resources. And anyone coming in with an attitude of actuallyism can also be called white saviorism, is a problematic belief. It's patronizing. It is baked in colonialism. It is what colonialism was founded on. Somebody outside of the culture knowing better than them. We at Abbey Research stand against this attitude. We've done a lot in our personal lives to make sure that we never conduct ourselves as such, even if we have in the past when we were younger at different times, speaking for myself. But as we move forward, that we empower empower folks to solve their own problems and provide them any resources they ask for. Not anything that we offer because we think we're better than them, even out of the quote unquote goodness of our heart, or the quote unquote mission trip, or the quote unquote call, whatever. So this is all very complicated. I get it. But if you would like an example of white saviorism and what is terrible about it and how patronizing it is, evidently we can watch this movie. So Dr. Erin, please tell us about Lakay.
So it's a 2015 documentary, written and directed by one of the said brothers, Alexius, where his brother and his wife and his sister decide, after hearing about the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, to go to Haiti to try and find his two older half-brothers, whom he has not seen in 28 years. He left Haiti when he was 5. His brother Romeo left when they left. He was even younger. And it is white saviorism in a way, but it's not, in that it doesn't go so far as to try and fix the problem. But it's very emblematic of a movie you make when you haven't traveled a lot internationally. And I could be wrong. Maybe these people have. That's not the impression that they gave. The impression that they gave was of Americans who have an understanding of what said place looks like through the television and are shocked to find that human beings try to survive. It's really complicated. They don't try to help, which for me, I think was part of the problem, because they were going and making this documentary 3 months after the earthquake. And is a lot
when Haitian 3 months after the earthquake, that is specifically when Haitian NGOs were saying, do not come, just send your resources.
It could have been 6 months after.
But still, it was up to a year. They were asking people not to go.
Yeah. They were asking people not to go. It's very clear from the documentary footage that it was still a place. I mean, if you watched our one-on-one video, you know, Haiti's always kind of jumped from one crisis to another. But a 7.1 magnitude earthquake creates its own crisis. And it was, from my perspective, badly done, y'all. And really what it comes down to is documentaries have a responsibility to engage with places ethically. And that is, we talk about like poverty porn and kind of this I put as a privileged disaster porn.
Privileged disaster porn is a good category.
Where you're making a lot of the situation visually to like showcase how bad things are.
Okay.
And so they were like, all of these buildings are destroyed. Look at these people living in tent villages. Like, it was a lot of shock and surprise. At to how bad things were and how badly things were being run. In terms of people getting access to healthcare and all of these things. And there was very little in the documentary that showed me that they were doing things to help. Now, they could have. I have no idea what they did. But they didn't talk about it, or they didn't show it. They were on a very personal journey to deal with some of their heritage and their feelings about being Haitian and being Haitian American and all this kind of stuff. But to do it in the middle of a inexplicably massive humanitarian crisis, under the auspices of finding their two brothers whom they hadn't had contact with since the earthquake, but they couldn't find them for a long time. And so they just ended up going to camps and interviewing doctors about how people were being treated and talking to people in where they used to live about. I was like, are you a humanitarian aid worker? Are you a doctor?
Because if you're taking this very personal journey, you can do that without a camera.
Yeah. And like, I think it was done, it appeared to be, you know, I'm making a lot of suppositions here because I don't know the filmmaker. it appeared to be one of those where it's like, we're going to show people what it looks like.
Okay.
Kind of like those UNICEF commercials or the ASPCA, where it's like,
where it's like, okay, well, we have to tell you how terrible it is.
This is what starvation looks like. Give us your money.
Yeah, baby with a swollen belly and flies all over its skin.
Yes.
That's poverty porn. Yeah, we're trying to make you feel so bad about how privileged you are that you will pity these people.
And like, there was a lot of, I think, earnest.
Well, it's usually earnest. It's not usually from a place of manipulation. It just
earnest surprise that there was joy in Haiti and love in Haiti, and
did they cross the thing into like, man, poverty's such a blessing because their life is so much simpler? Did they cross that Rubicon?
No, they did not.
Okay, thank goodness. Okay, that's a common feature in documentaries such as this. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's one of those where it's hard to know if they were, playing it up for the camera, but they were like, oh, it's just so amazing how people just help each other here. And I was like, humans are humans in other places? So it was a very ethnocentric insider documentary.
But it wasn't an insider. Like
insider. Yeah. And like,
does blood make you an insider? That's a great question.
Yeah, we were, we're exceptionally privileged to be trained social scientists. So we spent a lot of our time in academia thinking about the impact that we have in the communities that we work in, and how we change the places where we work, for good or bad, and how you can use people intentionally or unintentionally. And for a long time, academics did it real intentionally. And so
we're just damaging accidentally, not on purpose.
Yeah. And so for me, it's like, I see it through that lens, and what is seen cannot be unseen. I can't look at it. And I'm watching them film these people who are in a serious crisis, waiting for medical attention, in line for food from the UN. And I'm like, did you ask these people for consent? Do they know what you're doing? They were happy to talk to him. He speaks fluent Creole, has his whole life, is a Haitian born person. But it just made me feel a little bit too icky. But that to say, I think, when I messaged Dr. Kristen and she was like, oh boy, I'm not going to press play again. I was like, no, you don't have to. You've seen this film before. But it's still something important for us to talk about, to be critical of art that is produced. None of the other reviews, links in the living Google Doc below, were critical of this at all. And like at one point, I was like,
let me pause and say, I did find possibly a critical voice from the Village Voice, but the link is dead. So all I got was like the first 2 lines on Rotten Tomatoes that essentially said like, this is really personal, but then the link is dead. So I don't know. So it is a 2015 documentary. In 2015, massive media outlets were not covering documentaries the way they are now.
Yeah.
Even now, they're not covered very often. There were not, a ton of stuff. And the world was different in 2010, 2011, 2012, I would be very interested to see how they got funding to distribute this, who they went to, I'd be interested to know who wanted this version of this story told 5 years after it was filmed.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions to be asked about this film. And like, we're empathy educators. And so I want to try and empathize with the filmmaker and why he made these choices, and understand the personal trauma that he was going through. But I think I can empathize with all of that and still say I feel like it's irresponsible filmmaking. And I wanted an epilogue that said what they were going to do to change things, and because that was not, or to help, to impact, to not start another charity, but there are tangible things we can do to help people in crisis situations, in disaster situations, and we can do it ethically and responsibly. And I'm not sure making this documentary did that. We all, like, the news was there. We talked about it. Anderson, we all remember Anderson Cooper standing in the rubble crying. Like, we knew what it looked like in Haiti. And like, I was just continuously shocked. I spent 3 days learning about Haiti and was shocked that I knew that Haiti was really, really bad at administering, and all this political instability meant that people weren't getting the help that they needed. And this man who's Haitian born was like, "You mean you've been waiting this long for food?" And I'm like, "Have you been to a conflict zone?" These are your people?
As you're talking, it's making me really wonder what the relationship in the diaspora is.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, it's obviously something we're going to dig into, but because I'll be honest, there's a lot of Irish Americans that my husband will talk about meeting who had no idea what life was really like, but they had a picture in their head of what life was like. And John met somebody once in LA who tried very hard to tell him that he was more Irish than John was, because John was from the occupied North and was therefore not truly Irish. And this man had never been on the island, but his great grandmother was from Clare. And that's not an uncommon attitude among diaspora participants. Full stop. Italian diaspora, Polish diaspora, that's a diaspora thing. And John was livid that this guy talked about giving money to certain organizations that John knew were doing terrible things on the ground, and kind of what this looked like. And he had to leave the bar because he couldn't even be in the presence of this man. So as you're talking, I'm wondering what the Haitian expat experience is, if there is, because of the instability in Haiti. What does that, I mean, and John, like, for anyone who's never watched me before, my husband was born towards the end of the Northern Irish armed conflict, in kind of the middle end, and grew up in the waning days of it. And wondering what that looks like with the continual instability. I love that you brought up the empathy piece. I can completely understand their motivations, because this is, I think, some of the thing about empathy is understanding motivations and not necessarily having empathy for the outcome. Right. So, like, I think it's brilliant that he wanted to get to know his family. I think it's lovely, and it makes a lot of sense. And there is an Americanness of, like, let's grab a camera and go. And in 2010, that was a super masculine energy of, like, right, like, let's get going. We have airplanes and iPhones. Let's go. And so there's a lot of that there, but we have empathy for motivations and still say, okay, but the outcome from our understanding of the world is actually potentially more harmful than good. Yeah. And it wasn't the white saviorism that I was talking about. It still comes from the same root. It still comes from the root of, I'm not actually going to intellectually engage or emotionally. I will emotionally, but I'm not going to intellectually engage with what life looks like for people on the ground.
Yeah. And I think two things came to mind as you were talking there. One, he did talk about, Alexius did talk about at the beginning of the documentary, his relationship with being Haitian, and said, like, when he was younger, he would say he was anything but Haitian, because they literally got leaflets put through their front door saying, "Stay away from Haitians, they have AIDS." And so
I heard of that happening. Okay.
So he was like, when he was a kid growing up in America, in Chicago, he was like, oh, I was Cuban, I was French, I was like from Louisiana, I was not Haitian. So he has a very complicated relationship with his Haitianness. And, you know, I think it's a great story. I would have loved this documentary if they hadn't done it months after the largest, most massively destructive humanitarian crisis that island has ever seen, because it was just really incongruous to watch him look at his childhood home and share these memories with his siblings about where the outhouse was, and like remembered people running across the tin roofs, and that was all lovely. But then they would go talk to people who hadn't gotten regular food in 3 months. And, you know, it was kind of like when we talked about the film from Portugal, where we said, like, you can't be both Les Mis and
Jane the Virgin.
Jane the Virgin. Like, this could either be about, you know, highlighting what the disaster looked like in Haiti and trying to draw attention to it, or his family, like his journey to find his family and reconcile with his past and his father and like all of this emotional stuff. It just felt really, really weird against a backdrop of like starving children and tent cities full of displaced people and crumbling buildings. It was like if somebody had done it, like for me, the equivalent is like if somebody, like a Syrian American, had gone back to Aleppo to find their family after Aleppo was decimated.
That's not what we're doing here right now. Thank you for your time. But right now, I we need water.
It wouldn't have felt appropriate. Because I just kept asking. I was like, but how are you going to help these people? Like, it's adorable that you talk to these children and they want to talk to you and tell you that they want to be doctors and the president and whatever. But like, you know, then they go to an orphanage and talk about these kids who their parents died in the earthquake.
Yeah, and I always have a thing with people videotaping at orphanages because who gives consent? That's always a thing for me. These kids can't consent legally. We say that, and yet we let news people and folks film children all the time. It drives me bananas.
Yeah, and that it's the same thing for me. And I talked about kind of our training as academics a few minutes ago, but that's the same thing for me. My mind's just going like, did you ask these people for consent? Do they know what you're doing? Do they know how you're telling the story?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we had to grapple with our participants was like they wanted to know what story we were telling, rightfully so, since we were engaging with them in partnership and conversation, but also taking from them. Yeah. And they wanted to know what we were going to do with what they were giving them. And they had every right to, and we had to disclose that. Literally, it's called informed consent. And I was just watching this happen. I'm like, these people don't know what you're doing. They don't know what story you're telling. And they might be so desperate for attention and food because they're starving, or, you know, or sick or whatever. And they see a person with a camera and think it can make a difference. But that doesn't make it okay.
And I struggle even with, and I struggle with things like this of people using up resources that need to go to the local folks. Like I really like that a lot of more citizen journalists now that like Anderson Cooper can stay in Atlanta and we can get cell phone footage from somebody where like, you know, we don't have to fly somebody there. Cause I remember very vividly after Haiti, I was in my mid-20s and I was looking at a life in humanitarian work. And so I was like, and I'll get on a plane. Like, I can administer shots and clean things. Like I can go, I have basic first aid care. And like every single site was like, don't you dare come down here unless you are actively asked by somebody, like, please, you're going to use water and we don't have any. And so that kept flashing in my mind as you were talking is like even the Red Cross, which has a terrible reputation right, for entering into devastation and kind of leaving more devastation in its wake. The Red Cross was telling people not to come. Like the Red Cross was like, donate money. We need to buy water. Do you have a boat? Can you put bottled water on a boat from Cuba and bring it from Key West? Amazing. Like we need water. And it was a lot of that narrative of like, do not come here. And I remember that after Hurricane Matthew as well. Do not come here. We do not have clean water for you. You will be wasting resources.
Yeah. And I think, you know, whenever this film was made, we had a different level of technology and you know, social media and ability to access things. But, you know, now I think we try to be more aware and more conscious of the impact that we can have in circumstances. And certainly we saw this through the pandemic where there was a lot of people on the ground doing work and we were directed to help fund them.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Jose Andres has his whole system set up with the World Central Kitchen, and you can donate to them. And
they weren't asking for volunteers; they were asking for cash.
Exactly, they weren't asking for volunteers; they were asking for money, because that is the resource that everybody who's trying to help other people always needs, especially in these areas. So I'd like to think if this film was made now, it would be made differently, but. You know, obviously we were able to have a very philosophical discussion. So maybe we proved the point that even if you watch something that you don't agree with or that you don't enjoy, and that you find problems with, you can still learn a lot from it.
Oh gosh, absolutely. And again, it's still an empathy builder. It's still
spending.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And that's why. So, I was messaging Dr. Kristen back and forth, and she was like, oh no, and I was like, oh, maybe we should try and find another film. I forgot that she had found out that we weren't going to find another film. But then I was like, you know what? We can have a really good conversation about it anyway. And if you watch this, it may look like we're nitpicking, but we have a lot of experience to back up our perspectives, and we believe that understanding is not condoning. So I can understand these people and their motivations. That doesn't mean I have to agree with the way with which they went about making this film.
Correct. And I think it's important to remember there are a lot of people on Rotten Tomatoes who watched this thing and said it was Oscar worthy, and that for them it was, and it was very emotional and it pulled at your heartstrings, and that was what it was supposed to do in a lot of ways. And that this man, these two brothers, it sounds like really open and emotional vein, and said, here, you guys have my soul. And like, that's really intense. And it, in a way, it might sound like we're trying to say this was completely worthless and like whatever. And we're not. We're angry at it because we're frustrated with it, because as a piece of art, it potentially did more harm than good. And because my issue is that all those people that are like, it was really heartstrings, are not going to necessarily engage with it on this level. And they're going to maybe, again, perpetuate that these kind of things is what we should be doing, is how we should be interacting with difference. And it's just not like, it's what we thought we were supposed to do for a really long time, and look where it's gotten us. And so we are trying to propose, a different way of doing human, a different way, which is a whole lot more about listening, and consent and dignity and worth. Consent is a big byword. And it was not something that documentarians were asking for a long time, and not a lot of things that audiences were asking about. I read a lot more chatter now around documentaries and people being like, right, but what about consent? Like how can people consent? What does this look like? We have it more even around fictional stories. Like there was Gemma Chan was going to be making a movie about Vincent Chin, who was a victim of anti-Asian hate crime in Detroit, I think.
Yes.
And Gemma was really excited. She's a British Asian. I do not know her Asian heritage. I apologize. But like, was producing it. She was taking that money that she got from Crazy Rich Asians, go girl, and telling stories of her people. And the Eternals money, I'm sure she got paid well for that. But then she found out that nobody double checked with his family, and his family did not give consent for the story to be told this way. And she pulled all of her funding.
Yeah.
So like, even in fictional stories, we're having different conversations now, because stories are powerful and stories are how the world changes. And so that's why we're a little hard on this one.
Yeah.
I'll be really honest. And I'm not upset that we were hard on it. We do, however, hope that we find other things to watch between now and next year, other than the other documentaries that people were even critical of in the comments. So
yikes.
Okay, yikes on trikes. So I know there's a couple PBS things on Haitian Revolution. There was a couple of them. So we'll be potentially looking on, I'm sure our friends at Al Jazeera have done incredible something, because
I can't wait.
God love Al Jazeera. And we're going to keep looking. In the meantime, if you are joining us on our tour, our next stop is French Guiana. Here is what I know about French Guiana. It is where the Jamestown cult was. That is what I know about French Guiana, and that in one of the seasons of Gold Rush on the Discovery Channel, Todd Hoffman went down and tried to find gold and exploit the people of French Guiana. So you can tell we have a lot to learn.
So much to learn. Yeah. I mean, I confused it with Guinea.
Oh, I did too. I confused it with Equatorial Guinea. Then there's also a French Guinea and a French Guyana.
Yes. There's a French Guinea that's in Africa.
Yeah, and we're doing the one in South America.
We're doing the one in South America that is French Guiana. Y'all.
We got to figure out why everything's named that word.
Yeah, what is it? It must have to reference like the indigenous peoples of those.
Of something, yeah.
Don't know. We don't know. We'll find out about it, and we'll tell you what we've learned next week when we're in French Guiana.
See you then.
Bye.